Chapter 6, Part 1 of The Water Babies. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Corey Samuel. The Water Babies by Charles Kingsley. Chapter 6, Part 1. Thou little child, yet glorious in the night of heaven-born freedom on thy being's height, why with such earnest pains dost thou provoke the years to bring the inevitable yoke, thus blindly with thy blessedness at strife? Full soon thy soul shall have her earthly freight, and custom lie upon thee with a weight heavy as frost, and deep almost as life. Wordsworth. I come to the very saddest part of all my story. I know some people will only laugh at it, and call it much ado about nothing. But I know one man who would not, and he was an officer, with a pair of grey moustaches as long as your arm, who said once in company that two of the most heart-rending sights in the world, which moved him most to tears, which he would do anything to prevent or remedy, were a child crying over a broken toy, and a child stealing sweets. The company did not laugh at him. His moustaches were too long and too grey for that. But, after he was gone, they called him sentimental and so forth. All but one dear little old Quaker lady, with a soul as white as her cap, who was not, of course, generally partial to soldiers, and she said very quietly, like a Quaker, "Friends, it is borne upon my mind that that is a truly brave man." Now you may fancy that Tom was quite good, when he had everything that he could want or wish, but you would be very much mistaken. Being quite comfortable is a very good thing, but it does not make people good. Indeed, it sometimes makes them naughty, as it has made the people in America, and as it made the people in the Bible, who waxed fat and kicked like horses overfed and underworked. And I am very sorry to say that this happened to little Tom. For he grew so fond of the sea bull's-eyes and sea lollipops that his foolish little head could think of nothing else, and he was always longing for more, and wondering when the strange lady would come again and give him some, and what she would give him, and how much, and whether she would give him more than the others. And he thought of nothing but lollipops by day, and dreamt of nothing else by night. And what happened then? That he began to watch the lady to see where she kept the sweet things, and began hiding, and sneaking, and following her about, and pretending to be looking the other way, or going after something else, till he found out that she kept them in a beautiful mother-of-pearl cabinet, away in a deep crack of the rocks. And he longed to go to the cabinet, and yet he was afraid. And then he longed again, and was less afraid. And at last, by continual thinking about it, he longed so violently that he was not afraid at all. And one night, when all the other children were asleep, and he could not sleep for thinking of lollipops, he crept away among the rocks, and got to the cabinet. And behold! It was open. But when he saw all the nice things inside, instead of being delighted, he was quite frightened, and wished he had never come there. And then he would only touch them, and he did. And then he would only taste one, and he did. And then he would only eat one, and he did. And then he would only eat two, and then three, and so on. And then he was terrified lest she should come and catch him, and began gobbling them down so fast that he did not taste them, or have any pleasure in them. And then he felt sick, and would have only one more. And then only one more again. And so on, till he had eaten them all up. And all the while, close behind him, stood Mrs. Bedonebyasyoudid. Some people may say, but why did she not keep her cupboard locked? Well, I know, it may seem a very strange thing, but she never does keep her cupboard locked, every one may go and taste for themselves, and fare accordingly. It is very odd, but so it is, and I am quite sure that she knows best. Perhaps she wishes people to keep their fingers out of the fire by having them burned. She took off her spectacles because she did not like to see too much, and in her pity she arched up her eyebrows into her very hair, and her eyes grew so wide that they would have taken in all the sorrows of the world, and filled with great big tears, as they too often do. But all she said was, "Ah, you poor little dear, you are just like all the rest." But she said it to herself, and Tom neither heard nor saw her. Now, you must not fancy that she was sentimental at all. If you do, and think that she is going to let off you, or me, or any human being when we do wrong, because she is too tender-hearted to punish us, then you will find yourself very much mistaken, as many a man does every year and every day. But what did the strange fairy do when she saw all her lollipops eaten? Did she fly at Tom, catch him by the scruff of the neck, hold him, hawk him, hump him, hurry him, hit him, poke him, pull him, pinch him, pound him, put him in the corner, shake him, slap him, set him on a cold stone to reconsider himself, and so forth? Not a bit. You may watch her at work if you know where to find her, but you will never see her do that. For, if she had, she knew quite well Tom would have fought, and kicked and bit and said bad words, and turned again that moment into a naughty little heathen chimney-sweep, with his hand, like Ishmael's of old, against every man, and every man's hand against him. Did she question him, hurry him, frighten him, threaten him, to make him confess? Not a bit. You may see her, as I said, at her work often enough if you know where to look for her, but you will never see her do that. For, if she had, she would have tempted him to tell lies in his fright, and that would have been worse for him, if possible, than even becoming a heathen chimney-sweep again. No, she leaves that for anxious parents and teachers, lazy ones, some call them, who instead of giving children a fair trial, such as they would expect and demand for themselves, force them by fright to confess their own faults, which is so cruel and unfair that no judge on the bench dare do it to the wickedest thief or murderer, for the good British law forbids it, aye, and even punish them to make them confess, which is so detestable a crime that it is never committed now, save by inquisitors and kings of Naples, and a few other wretched people of whom the world is weary. And then they say, "We have trained up the child in the way he should go, and when he grew up he has departed from it. Why then did Solomon say that he would not depart from it?" But perhaps the way of beating, and hurrying, and frightening, and questioning, was not the way that the child should go, for it is not even the way in which a colt should go if you want to break it in, and make it a quiet, serviceable horse. Some folks may say, "Ah, but the fairy does not need to do that if she knows everything already." True, but if she did not know, she would not surely behave worse than a British judge and jury, and no more should parents and teachers either. So she just said nothing at all about the matter, not even when Tom came next day with the rest for sweet things. He was horribly afraid of coming, but he was still more afraid of staying away, lest any one should suspect him. He was dreadfully afraid, too, lest there should be no sweets, as was to be expected, he having eaten them all, and lest then the fairy should inquire who had taken them. But behold, she pulled out just as many as ever, which astonished Tom, and frightened him still more. And, when the fairy looked him full in the face, he shook from head to foot. However, she gave him his share like the rest, and he thought within himself that she could not have found him out. But, when he put the sweets into his mouth, he hated the taste of them, and they made him so sick that he had to get away as fast as he could, and terribly sick he was, and very cross and unhappy all the week after. Then, when next week came, he had his share again, and again the fairy looked him full in the face, but more sadly than she had ever looked, and he could not bear the sweets, but took them again in spite of himself. And when Mrs. Do-as-you-would-be-done-by came, he wanted to be cuddled like the rest, but she said very seriously, "I should like to cuddle you, but I cannot. You are so horny and prickly." And Tom looked at himself, and he was all over prickles, just like a sea egg, which was quite natural, for you must know and believe that people's souls make their bodies, just as a snail makes its shell. I'm not joking, my little man, I am in serious, solemn earnest. And therefore, when Tom's soul grew all prickly with naughty tempers, his body could not help growing prickly too, so that nobody would cuddle him, or play with him, or even like to look at him. What could Tom do now but go away and hide in a corner and cry? For nobody would play with him, and he knew full well why. And he was so miserable all that week, that when the ugly fairy came and looked at him once more full in the face, more seriously and sadly than ever, he could stand it no longer, and thrust the sweetmeats away, saying, "No, I don't want any, I can't bear them now," and then burst out crying, poor little man, and told Mrs. Be-done-by-as-you-did every word as it happened. He was horribly frightened when he had done so, for he expected her to punish him very severely. But, instead, she only took him up and kissed him, which was not quite pleasant, for her chin was very bristly indeed, but he was so lonely-hearted he thought that rough kissing was better than none. "I will forgive you, little man," she said. "I always forgive everyone the moment they tell me the truth of their own accord." "Then you will take away all these nasty prickles?" "That is a very different matter. You put them there yourself, and only you can take them away." "But how can I do that?" asked Tom, crying afresh. "Well, I think it is time for you to go to school, so I shall fetch you a schoolmistress, who will teach you how to get rid of your prickles." And so she went away. Tom was frightened at the notion of a schoolmistress, for he thought she would certainly come with a birch rod or a cane. But he comforted himself at last that she might be something like the old woman in Vendale, which she was not in the least, for when the fairy brought her, she was the most beautiful little girl that ever was seen, with long curls floating behind her like a golden cloud, and long robes floating all round her like a silver one. "There he is," said the fairy, "and you must teach him to be good, whether you like or not." "I know," said the little girl, but she did not seem quite to like, for she put her finger in her mouth, and looked at Tom under her brows, and Tom put his finger in his mouth, and looked at her under his brows, for he was horribly ashamed of himself. The little girl seemed hardly to know how to begin, and perhaps she would never have begun at all, if poor Tom had not burst out crying, and begged her to teach him to be good, and help him to cure his prickles, and at that she grew so tender-hearted that she began teaching him as prettily as child was ever taught in the world. And what did the little girl teach Tom? She taught him first what you have been taught ever since you said your first prayers at your mother's knees, but she taught him much more simply. For the lessons in that world, my child, have no such hard words in them as the lessons in this, and therefore the water babies like them better than you like your lessons, and long to learn them more and more, and grown men cannot puzzle or quarrel over their meaning, as they do here on land, for those lessons all rise clear and pure, like the test out of Overton Pool, out of the everlasting ground of all life and truth. So she taught Tom every day in the week, only on Sundays she always went away home, and the kind fairy took her place. And before she had taught Tom many Sundays, his prickles had vanished quite away, and his skin was smooth and clean again. "Dear me," said the little girl, "why, I know you now. You are the very same little chimney-sweep who came into my bedroom." "Dear me," cried Tom, "and I know you too now. "You are the very little white lady whom I saw in bed." And he jumped at her, and longed to hug and kiss her, but did not, remembering that she was a lady born. So he only jumped round and round her till he was quite tired. And then they began telling each other all their story, how he had got into the water, and she had fallen over the rock, and how he had swum down to the sea, and how she had flown out of the window, and how this, that, and the other, till it was all talked out, and then they both began over again, and I can't say which of the two talked fastest. And then they set to work at their lessons again, and both liked them so well that they went on well till 7 full years were past and gone. You may fancy that Tom was quite content and happy all those 7 years, but the truth is, he was not. He always had one thing on his mind, and that was, where little Ellie went when she went home on Sundays. "To a very beautiful place," she said. But what was the beautiful place like, and where was it? Ah, that is just what she could not say. And it is strange, but true, that no one can say, and that those who have been oftenest in it, or even nearest to it, can say least about it, and make people understand least what it is like. There are a good many folks about the other end of nowhere, where Tom went afterwards, who pretend to know it from north to south as well as if they had been penny postmen there. But, as they are safe at the other end of nowhere, 999,000,000 miles away, what they say cannot concern us. But the dear, sweet, loving, wise, good, self-sacrificing people who really go there can never tell you anything about it, save that it is the most beautiful place in all the world, and if you ask them more, they grow modest and hold their peace for fear of being laughed at, and quite right they are. So all that good little Ellie could say was, that it was worth all the rest of the world put together, and of course that only made Tom the more anxious to go likewise. "Miss Ellie," he said at last, "I will know why I cannot go with you when you go home on Sundays, or I shall have no peace, and give you none either." "You must ask the fairies that." So when the fairy, Mrs. Be-done-by-as-you-did, came next, Tom asked her. End of chapter 6, part 1.